Hey everyone, welcome to yet another episode of the Industry Show. I'm Nitin Bajaj, and joining us today in the beautiful town of Malibu is Vardaan Vasisht.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us. Man, this view is awesome. It's amazing.
Yes, we're very fortunate. And it's been a beautiful sun finally out today, so that's great.
Yeah, and with a hint of rain.
Yes.
So if I get distracted watching the dolphins, do snap.
We'll make sure we keep it interesting.
Yes.
So.
All right. So, let's start at the very beginning. Tell us about, where you were born, about your parents, about your school.
Yep. Yeah, so I was born in India, in a city called Chandigarh, as you might know.
Yes.
It's one of the few planned cities.
Yes.
Very beautiful city. I grew up there, did my undergrad in Bachelor's of Commerce. My dad, he was a professor in zoology, so he worked at Punjab University. I come from an academic background, and then my mom was a homemaker. I'm the youngest of three sons, so I had a lot of freedom to do things that I wanted to do because my siblings had done pretty much everything to annoy them before. But I think I was just very fortunate to grow up in a city like Chandigarh. My family is pretty liberal, so it was good to have that independence and freedom to grow up, being in India, in one of the best cities, I think.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. I was surprised when I first went to Chandigarh, and I was like, all these sectors, they all make sense. I can find my way around. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's in pre-Google days, it was actually a good thing to have. Now you can find everything. So yeah.
So, growing up in this beautiful city, tell us about your journey to the U.S. You came to school here. What was the motive, and behind the choice and other things? Yep.
So I didn't come to school here to the U.S. and my coming to U.S. was a little bit unexpected. Essentially, so I come from a middle class family in India. My parents didn't have the disposable income to send me to school in the U.S. or anywhere abroad. Right. But I always wanted to travel, and I remember as a very young kid, I got my passport made. And it never got stamped for a long time. Yes, I saved some money and got a passport. One thing I did when I was doing my undergrad was I joined an organization called ISEC. It's a very big global student organization that operates essentially facilitating traineeships from one country to another for people who are in business, like students in business, as a cultural exchange program. So I knew that was a good way for me to at least have an opportunity to go out at some point. Right. And I think it was right at around so I did this during my undergrad, and at the end of my BCom, I decided I'll file a traineeship through ISEC. Okay. That didn't really materialize into anything interesting, so I decided to do my MBA. At that time, my family had moved to Delhi, so I ended up doing my MBA in Delhi. Okay. And right after getting out of my MBA, I got a job with Bharti Telecom. But as luck would have it, within a few months of working with Bharti, I got this letter, actually it was a physical letter back then from ISEC saying, hey, you've been matched to a startup in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Wow. And I didn't know where Ann Arbor was, but it said US. I was like, hey, that's great, that's what matters. So I ended up basically saying yes to the traineeship. Okay. And the process was, these bunch of young, really smart kids from University of Michigan called me and did a phone interview, which lasted about an hour. Wow. But then all of a sudden it just got disconnected. I think it was probably phones in India at the time, and I never got a call back that night. So I was pretty worried and nervous that I didn't make it.
What happened? Yeah.
And a couple of days later, I got an email, and that basically said that I have an offer to come join the startup. Wow. And that was that. That was like, hey, I'm gonna get ready, pack my bags, and go. And at the time, I owned a car, so I sold the car, got my ticket to US, and got on a plane. I got here with $100 in my pocket. So
it was very quick.
Yeah, it was really, really quick, and like I said, totally unexpected. Wow. But it was sort of the earlier actions I had taken to join ISEC, and then just getting lucky to find a company that I ended up coming to. Yeah.
Wow.
That was the journey.
So you came here on a J1.
So I came on a traineeship visa, J1, and it came with its restrictions such as the 2-year home residency. Yes. But back in the days, and I think times have changed now, right? Yes. Now, a lot of my friends, their kids come here and go back to India. In fact, they want to go back, and it's great. But at the time when I came here, it was like, hey, there's no way I'm
going back. Yeah.
So it was pretty much heads down, work hard, find information online and figure out how I can stay here.
Yeah.
And then I went through the whole process of getting my 2-year residency waiver, and ended up going from J1 to an H1, and then eventually figuring out the next steps to live here.
Okay, so we'll talk about that, but let's delve a little more into you as a through some of our rapid fire questions, right? Tell us maybe the last couple of books you've read.
Okay. So to be honest, I've kind of stopped doing long form reading, mainly because I'm very interested in like what's happening in the future, and a lot of things that are moving at fast pace are not in books anymore.
Yes.
So I watch a lot of YouTube videos and documentaries, and there's just so much information online. But I do try to carve out some time. So I would say one of the books that I found interesting recently that I went through is called Bad Blood. It's a book about Theranos and its CEO Elizabeth Holmes. Yeah. And the whole book was very fascinating because it's in the tech and sort of the startup space. Right. What I didn't know about this company until pretty much when it became a controversy was that they actually started in 2002 or 2003, and this is before my own company, which we'll talk about. Yeah. But for a company to go for that long and raise so much of money from some of the smartest people in the industry, right, and yet really have no solid product or be able to play that game and get that far was sort of quite an eye opener. Which also begs the question now. There's so many highly valued private companies with very little transparency in what's going on. Yeah. So one has to wonder if there's like emperor without clothes story here. But I think that's just a very interesting book. Certainly because I'm also interested in the startup world. So
right, and I was going to say, would love to explore a little more of that as you are going through your own fund and investments in other companies. How do you look at that? So that's really interesting. We'll hold on to that thought. Okay. Any person you have met or would have liked to meet?
So I've not been networking a lot, to be honest. I've been pretty much heads down, building my business.
High up in the hills with the water.
And I think, now things will change that I'm in Malibu. But no, I've had the opportunity and pleasure to meet some really interesting people. Some in my family. I have a cousin who's a fashion designer in India, so I always saw him as an icon.
You want to drop the name?
His name is Rohit Bal, and I think most people, at least in India, know about him.
May not have heard of it.
But yeah, I mean, just growing up with somebody, who's even, as family is kind of seen as a public figure was quite interesting to follow. And like I said, I'd love to meet more interesting people, and I'm just starting to meet, folks in LA. But yeah, it's just fascinating to me, and how amazing some of these people are, when you start talking to them.
And I'm sure a lot of people find you interesting, so it's
I hope so,
yeah. So we're Indian, but you're now an American. What nationality would you have, if not Indian, what nationality would you have preferred to be?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm actually just recently, I've become a US citizen. Right. After staying in the US for about 20 years. So some of it was by choice, some of it was the immigration process. Yes. As you know, it can take a long time. Yeah. But so I've gone through very recently, just as of last few months, I've gone through the process of getting my US citizenship and also renouncing my Indian citizenship. And it's been an emotional and surprisingly very efficient process, which I actually thought it'll take a bit of an effort. But I think ultimately and ideally, I would like to have some sort of a global citizen passport where you can travel or live anywhere. And we kind of do, a lot of people do that anyways. But for now, I'm pretty happy with the US passport. Okay. I would love to have kept my Indian passport, but I don't have that choice. It's not US that tells you that you can have dual citizenship, but for some reason India doesn't want you to have the second citizenship.
It's a patriotic country.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the country is amazing, and the OCI card, which you might have heard of, it's pretty good. I mean, it's like lifetime access to be in India as long as you want, to do pretty much whatever you want. So I'm at least excited to have that. Yeah, because I want to keep my ties to India.
So talking about your startup, where did you get the idea? What was the genesis of it?
Yeah, so it's been a journey. I came to US to work for another startup.
Right.
I was very fortunate to join this company where it was a handful of people, and we started the company at the .com boom era, and so everything was very euphoric and positive, and we grew the company from under 10 people to about 400 people. Wow. Sold it to Gray Advertising, which is a large ad agency.
Part of the WPP
now they're
group.
part of WPP. Yeah. Well, for the last 10 years or so, they've been part of WPP group. But that starting point of coming to a company that was so nascent and being part of that startup was just an amazing sort of jumping board for me, right? Yeah. I also decided to kind of really put my head down and learn something new. Here I was a kid coming from India to America, and I didn't want to have a reason to go back. Yes. Certainly not getting fired. So I did put a lot of time and effort in it, and I think I learned something very unique in the advertising in the ad tech space, which helped me eventually then build up my own startup. And just a little bit of background on that is, so we used to have a lot of clients at Beyond Interactive who would spend millions of ad dollars to get traffic on their site. Right. But the problem was that not many people of the sort of audiences that were coming were converting. Okay. So the question I kept asking, right, was why people don't convert, and what can we do to help them convert, and that was the genesis of HookLogic. So I would say that 6 years working pretty deep in the trenches and understanding our client base and understanding the problems was sort of the aha moment to say, hey, we can do something here. That
you were able to carve out a niche out of. How do you take these dollars and give them a return on their investment?
Yes, and what kind of tools and services you can provide to these companies, which ultimately it's about mitigating risk as a startup, and so that we thought was a pretty good place to enter the space.
So this is like early 2000s when you're setting up HookLogic.
So it was also somewhat unique because, and we'll talk about immigration.
Sure.
So unlike many startups where you hear, somebody comes out of school and they started a company or quit and started a company, my process wasn't that black and white. Partly because there was a process I had to go through from an immigration standpoint, but I think the idea was really solid that we thought, and then for us, me and my co-founder, it was like, hey, let's go test market this idea. Yes. And we didn't want to give up our full-time jobs because at that time we didn't know where it would go. That
pretty much was your existence, right? You needed to keep your job to stay in the country?
Yeah, literally if I didn't have a job, I would be back in India in like less than 2 weeks. Yeah. But also we felt, we had good jobs, and it was a decision to make. Should we go into a startup or not? Right. Knowing that we had a good proposition. So the way we did it is we used to have our day job, 9 to 9. Yeah. And then I would come back home, and my business partner would come over, and we would start working on brainstorming. 9 to 9. Yeah. That was more like 10 to 2 or 3 a.m. And then just to sort of come back to your question, what we did was we knew one of my clients' cheap tickets. Back then, which was spending again $30-40 million and having troubles with conversion, so we thought, hey, we can solve the problem. So surely they're going to be our client, right? So without any conflict of interest, because we were not an agency, basically we started putting our pitch deck together. And while we thought we would get cheap tickets, we said, hey, why don't we just pick up the phone and start calling all other OTAs, online travel agencies. And so we would call Orbitz, Priceline, Expedia. And so fast forward a few weeks, where we started sort of doing this whole sort of initiative of pitching. Well, turns out cheap tickets wasn't interested in what we were doing. Organizationally, they were not ready. But Expedia, the person on the other end who became a very good client and a dear friend, said, hey, we don't think you can do it, but if you can build it, come show us a prototype and we'll talk next. And so sure enough, we put the phone down, got our CTO, who was also the CTO of my last company, built out a prototype, flew out to Seattle, pitched in front of about 40 people. Wow. And they all nodded their heads and said, hey, we think you can do something for us. And so we went into the room and they said, how much do you want to get paid for it? We looked at each other and Said $75,000. Sounds good. The guy laughed and he said, "No, I'm paying you $50,000." So it was like, "Hey, that's fine.
Sure, we'll take it."
So yeah, that's how we got into business.
So you start off your first business in this country, and you get Expedia as your first customer.
Yes, and that was amazing. It was definitely a lot of hard work. Just picking up the phone sometimes make things happen too. So
that's such a dream.
Yeah.
Wow. So yeah, let's talk about immigration, because it has come up a couple of times. So you came here on your J1, you made this transition. This company said, yes, we'll hire you. They filed for your work visa, which is the H1B, and then you come up with this idea of a startup. What is that transition? And specifically from that immigration perspective, you've lived through that pain. You are now here as a citizen of this country. You're seeing what the transformation is looking like. So talk to us a bit more about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just to give you a sense, while we were doing HookLogic, I was involved with about 10 plus H1 visas.
Mm-hmm.
I did a handful of green cards. So I like to think I'm an immigration expert, but
yes.
Obviously it's a very complicated topic. I think personally for me, one of the big challenges was, as I knew I wanted to do a startup,
mm-hmm.
but everything from a legality and immigration standpoint, wasn't really going to help, right? Mm-hmm. Just the fact that you cannot even own equity in a company,
right.
At least back then.
Yes.
Now you have a startup visa, but
right.
Back then you couldn't own equity in a LLC or
mm-hmm.
a partnership. Was pretty tricky to even say, hey, how do I start a company and have ownership in the company, right? And turns out there were ways to get around it and create a C corporation or an S mm-hmm. corporation. And then back to immigration, the fact that one, you have a full-time job, and if you leave it, you're gonna have to go back, right? So how do you start that initiative, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it was quite challenging in that sense, but that kind of pushes you to be more creative and to
right.
understand what paths you can take.
Yeah.
And in my case, I kind of realized that the best way for me to mitigate risk was to have a company that's up and running.
Right.
And so we focused on building a prototype and selling it to Expedia, a company like Expedia,
right.
having real revenue, having real
mm-hmm.
business, and over time be able to migrate myself. So
right.
so I didn't go from a 2-week notice into my startup. I went in a 6-month process where I was pretty transparent with my last company to say, hey, look, at some point I'm going to move,
right.
And let's come up with the plan to build the team here, which they also appreciated.
Right.
But it was a gradual process to move on.
But I think one key thing is, the amount of hard work you put in, not only in the new startup, but with the existing company, mm-hmm. where they respected you to say, okay, fine, we understand you have other aspirations. We are okay to hang on to you for the next whatever months or year, mm-hmm. While you make that transition, right? Because if you're not putting in that kind of building that trust and relationship, they're going to say, oh, you have other aspirations? Fine, go figure it out.
Absolutely. And I think also, just on I would say what's really important is how do you become indispensable on the whole right. idea of you cannot just dispose me.
Yes.
Because I was running one of the most profitable business mm-hmm. centers there,
right.
and I was building a very unique proposition within
right.
the ad world. Mm-hmm. That certainly gave me more confidence that they wouldn't just give me a pink slip.
Right.
But also, like you said, it's all about relationships. It's mm-hmm. Having that transparency and toning it properly to say, look, this is my long-term aspiration. Yes. But now I'm here and I'm committed. So
right, it's a mature conversation which you have been able to come to. You have put the work.
Yeah.
To say, hey, we can have a mature conversation about this.
Yeah, and you never know. I could have been fired, and we won't be having this conversation either. But that's the risk you take, right? So
right. So you've been part of a lot of successful, startups, right? Starting from the first one you came into, and then a couple of your own. Tell us a bit more about, what were the size and scale mm-hmm. of the operations of these companies, and the exits, and how it played out in a couple of minutes.
Got it. Yeah. So with Beyond Interactive, which was the startup I joined, I was part of the founding team.
Yes.
The exit wasn't made public, so I cannot speak the exact numbers. Sure. But just to give you a sense of scale mm-hmm. and what we were up to. So we were one of the first companies to become a full-fledged digital advertising right. agency. And that company grew from under 10, 12 people when I joined to mm-hmm. over 400 people. We mm-hmm. had offices in 10 plus more countries. Mm-hmm. And at the time of exit, Basically, it was also still .com boom, so
Yeah.
we had a fairly substantial and good exit.
Yes.
And then in terms of HookLogic, that I was more closely involved from
Right.
the day one. We did start a company in my apartment with 2 people, and then going on to 3 and 4 and 5. And at some point saying, hey, we need to have an office. I used to have a roommate as well, so she didn't like the fact that people were staying overnight. Just being loud and passionate about how to build a company. But yeah, so just to give you a sense of HookLogic, we built out basically a platform and a marketplace for brands to sell products within retail,
Right.
to be able to come in and bid a la Google style and get their products on top of search results.
Right.
And the unique aspect, or the way we built our company, was that we didn't take any venture money for the first 6 years. We built it on revenue,
Bootstrapped
such
it.
as taking money from Expedia and then other clients. So we grew the company to about 75 people without venture money.
Wow.
And then we got approached. We were also out there, but we had Bain Capital as one of our VCs, the first VC that came in, and that basically A round. So we took a growth round, not a
Right.
seed round,
Yeah.
and that A round took us to pretty much double the company. Following that, we did B and C rounds, and then eventually the company was over 200 people. We did upwards of $250 million of gross revenue,
Right.
and then we had offices in five countries. And that exit is public information.
Yes.
So we
250
sold the
million,
company for $250 million
Yep.
to a company called Criteo.
Yep.
So
And
it was
it's a
great
public
exit.
company, right?
And Criteo is a public company. Yeah,
Yep. Great. That's amazing.
it's fun, right?
So you went from being, in the heart of a startup, growing it to a size of, $250 million in revenue. You had a successful exit, and now you're doing what a lot of the successful entrepreneurs do. You have an investment fund. So you're kind of sort of on the other side. Tell us a bit more about your investment philosophy. What kind of companies you look at, what kind of genres, and what are you looking for?
Yeah, so just to, it's a pretty nascent fund.
Right.
And the reason it's so new is because after our exit, I decided that I'd worked hard for a long time,
Yes.
and so it's worth taking a break.
Of
So
course.
my wife and I decided to travel for a year.
Okay.
So we did our global trip, and then got back to New York. That was early 2018, and decided that we would want to try another place.
Yes.
And we'd come to LA before, so
And I'm glad you did, because this wouldn't have happened.
yeah, or maybe you would come to New York. I don't know, but
sure.
no, I'm super glad that we did,
Yes.
especially with the winter in New York, and
Yes.
so it was a personal decision to move to LA. But we've been pretty busy, kind of settling in a new place. At the same time, I've kind of had a lot of time to think
Right.
and figure out what's next for me. And being an entrepreneur, and especially a first generation immigrant to a country, and still be able to to make it through and build something, I feel I have somewhat a responsibility to
Right.
to help other entrepreneurs.
Yes.
So the fund that I've created, it's called Varanium, and Varanium actually is in Sanskrit, has a very deep meaning, which goes into the philosophy of the fund. So essentially, it's it's someone who's worthy, somebody who aspires and takes action to do something good
Right.
and excellent, and that takes a lot of thinking and contemplation. And so I think, from a fund standpoint, that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for entrepreneurs who want to build something great, right? Hopefully that does better for the world.
Right.
But again, are very grounded and have put a lot of time and effort to build something that will add real value and become meaningful.
Yes.
And that's what the fund's going to focus on in terms of our areas of sort of investment. It's a very early stage fund, so anywhere from of 1 or 2 founders to a small team that's prototyping, pre-revenue.
Okay.
It can be in multiple categories. Martech for sure, is the space
That's
I come
your
from.
domain,
But
yep.
my interest is also through the fund to invest in companies that are in healthcare or education technology.
Right.
So the fund's structured to be the seed investor, and more importantly, be able for myself and people that I know to come in and also help as advisor,
Guide and mentor,
to the founders. Yes.
Great. So, talking about guidance mentors, have you used a coach or a mentor?
So I don't have a single mentor or a
Sure.
coach. tapped into lots of different people that I admire, and learned or tried to learn, from them by asking them questions. I think I'd love to. There's so many different aspects of our life, right? In business, in personal life, and for me, the idea of having one person who can tell me everything just does not seem rational or practical. So I've always followed this sort of notion of, pick a topic that I have questions around and then find the right person. And the beauty is sometimes you don't even have to go away from your couch, right? There's so much information online.
YouTube.
YouTube, and there's some specialty, like areas or sites where you can learn.
Right.
But yes, my goal is to have a small group of, close people who are my sounding board. So as I have ideas or issues that I need to run by, I know who to go to them. Yeah, exactly. And that's, now that I have time, I'm working on it. Yeah.
So, talking about motivation and what drives you. So it's a two-part question. One, I want to know what is your motivation, right? The other is, has there been a change in motivation since you had a successful exit? Are you more now laid back, and are you looking for something else to motivate you?
That's a great question, and I think it's a two-part answer. I think early on, it was for me it's basically the motivation was to prove myself, right? To myself. It's like, hey, I believe I can do something. Now I gotta, prove it, right? And that was the big driver for me to, in my case, it was building a company. It was like, okay, if I can, I'm in this country, and I've just gone through a startup experience through another company. Can I do it myself? And so that was for many years. I would say upwards of 15 years. That was the driver. And yes, post exit, all of a sudden you have this big gap because hey, I just had a goal and I fulfilled it. And so what do I do next? And that's what I've been thinking a lot about. And I think, there's few things that are clear to me. So there's not like one thing that I would say, hey, this is what drives me. This is what gets me up in the morning. And I've tried to be very honest and say, okay, what do I really want next in life? And I know for a long time, pretty much that I've tried to contemplate is that I'm not somebody who wants to run after the next shiny object. So for me, it's something more meaningful, something deeper. I think big part of it comes from giving back or helping other people. So at the moment, I'm really focusing on what that project or set of projects would be, to get me up in the morning and say, hey, what I'm doing is very fulfilling. Plus, there's focus on personal life and and things that you should have for a full life. So
So talking about giving back, I know you're involved with a social impact cause. Let's talk about that. Haim, it's something that's close to your heart and your family. So tell us a bit more about that.
Okay. Yeah. And so first, Haim is my dad's name, and he passed a few years ago. So I've kind of force-fitted to say what would that be, right? So it stands for hands-on education and mentoring, with kind of the abbreviation. But the story behind it is that I was back in India, 2 years ago, and this was one of my first sort of times when I went back for more than a few weeks, and that I was on phone calls all the time. So I had an opportunity to sit with my mom and also my sister-in-law to see how they basically every day they teach these bunch of kids who show up at our place. These are underprivileged kids, they're coming from the neighborhood, and then the idea is that from my mom's side or from anyone as a volunteer, it's an amazing thing to do, is to help kids and educate them. But as I sat through these few sessions, I realized that there's a lot of optimization that can be done, there's a lot of efficiency that can be built. And so essentially I kind of took out my notebook and started jotting down what are the different moving parts of creating something that as a platform that can educate lots of kids. And so that's essentially what Haim is. It's still in a very early stage, but I'm building a prototype right now where on one hand the volunteers, i.e. say somebody like my mom or somebody who has time can come in and say I want to teach X number of kids. This is the place where I can teach, and then they give their schedule. Right? It doesn't have to be hard commitment. It is, hey, I'm available every day, weekday from 2 to 4 p.m. or if they're working from 7 to 8 p.m.
But
and
some days I may not be able to make it. That's
exactly.
Fine. Yeah.
So just a very broad, non-committed schedule that they're raising their hand and saying this is when I can teach. And then on the flip side, on the other side of the platform is recruiting kids, which in India is not that hard because you can walk into a neighborhood and you'll find 100 kids who need help. But engaging their parents and telling them about the program and how this works, where kids can show up at a sort of well scrutinized place.
It's safe, it's vetted.
Yes.
It's going to be once they go there, they're going to get education and it'll be safe for them.
And a feedback loop, right? Hey, they did show up.
Yes.
And then, my parents might not know what exactly they understood or got taught that day, but at least there's some trigger points to say, this is an ongoing. And then just to close on it, the third aspect is the content that you teach, right? So certainly English is very important, basic math is very important, and most people can teach that. That's the beauty, is like we have a lot of educated people. But underlying, how do you build consistency and and understand the progress of the student? And that's where the platform really helps, because it allows you to you being the central party to understand who's showing up, how frequently they're showing up. Are they going from section 1 to section 2 quickly, or they're taking a lot of time?
What is the pace?
And then if sometimes the volunteer is not available to teach, can you send them for extra classes elsewhere within that 1 kilometer radius? So that's the model, and the prototype is just now ready, and the big thing next is to launch it in the Indian market, which would be very focused on one city, and hopefully you get another partner that can really take it and scale it. So but I think it's a viable, doable project.
I love the idea. Yes, it is.
And it doesn't take much to build something like this.
Yeah, especially in a country like India that's has so many limitations but also so many opportunities.
Yeah, and everybody has a cell phone.
Yes.
And I mean, you gotta leverage technology in whichever way you can. So
I love the idea.
Thank
you. Kind of bringing it back to the gist of the show and the theme, how has your Indian ethnicity shaped you, your thoughts, your decisions as an entrepreneur, as an individual?
So I think a lot of positives. I would say, I was raised as a kid, to always be a nice person, a good person, and value relationships over money, right? That was sort of the underlying theme. I think it's very prevalent today, even in, across the board. Obviously, we all get attracted to materialistic stuff, but I think that underlying theme of, hey, relationships matter, and you should value them over anything else. I think that was very helpful both in my personal life and has been in my professional life. The other thing, which I don't know how many people really experience that growing up in a developed country, but in a developing country like India, it's lack of resources. And so, I have many instances, but just to give you an example, when I was a kid, I wanted to get a motorbike. And my parents was like, hell no, you're not getting a motorbike, like, where did this crazy idea come from? And I was like, okay, no, I need to have a motorbike because that's the cool thing. That's how, basically you get any attention.
Exactly.
And so what I did was, I was like, okay, I don't have the resources or the means to get it now, but it got me into convincing my friends who were richer than me and say, hey, you don't really need that tennis racket because you never play, or you don't need that video game because you've played it 10 times. So let me be the middle party and trade it. And so it got me out to, to talk to random shopkeepers and other people and start transacting on behalf of, my friends and also get a commission on it. And so, I didn't have the direct resources, but it pushed me out of my comfort zone and get creative.
Nice.
And sure enough, within, a year and a half, I had enough money to, to sell my scooter and add my saved money and get a motorbike. Wow. So that's an example of how, coming from a place such as India where there's not much in terms of resources, but if you really are determined to get something, and I think that's I've applied that pretty much all my life. I mean, our first office for HookLogic, I know we wanted to be in a fancier place in Soho, and for any good setup, it was super expensive. So I found an office which was pretty run down. And I super hard negotiated, which is, by the way, the other thing, being an Indian, you always negotiate. We negotiated. We even had the owner of the property, like sold on this idea that we'll be a super cool tech company in that space. So they should give us money
so
to
raise the
space.
property value. Yeah.
And literally they wrote us a $150,000 check.
Wow.
We moved things around, we painted it, and it was a very cool place, which got us a lot of talent later. And
nice.
So those are the kind of things, coming from India or coming from my sort of background.
It's ingrained in you.
It sort of comes natural, right? So I think the only thing that comes to mind on the flip side would be that I am very risk averse, as compared to some of my other friends here. And so sometimes I lose opportunities, right?
Sure.
But so far it's paid off well. Some of those opportunities haven't gone either. So I think it's a balance that you have to constantly get to, and that's again part of our big underlying theme coming from India. Is like how do you balance your life? So yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so any thoughts for other entrepreneurs along the lines, philosophical or practical, that you would want to share?
Well, I think first of all, everybody goes through their own journey, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that I learned, so I can share a few of those. Well, I think as an entrepreneur, purely from a business standpoint, I would say, follow your actions over your passion. I think it's important to be passionate, but it's easy to also find passions, right? Especially when something's fun. Hey, I'm passionate about X or Y or Z.
Right.
But it's really your underlying actions that lead to results, right? So think what actions you're taking every day or, like consistently that, of course, you want to have fun with doing, but that's something that you want to really focus on and say, okay, this is what I like to do, but this is what I'm really willing to work for.
Right.
And if you can find your next venture or whatever you're doing now to sort of focus around those actions, then I think your chances of success are going to be much higher, because ultimately the actions are what going to result into a meaningful outcome.
Yes.
So that's one. I would say on a personal front, it's everybody talks about balance, but it's very easy to lose balance, especially when you're running around, you're flying around.
18-hour days.
Yes, and building businesses are not easy. Right. So I would say that there has to be a true commitment to yourself to stay healthy, to keep your personal relationships. And also, if not going to be healthy, what's the point of having an amazing exit, but being in a hospital or or not being able to move around? So
we should do a follow-up show on this: how to look 30 forever.
Yes, yeah. I won't disclose my age, but yes.
Hey, you're 30.
It sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think balancing life, even when you're building something very important, right, is going to be critical to have a meaningful, long, fun life.
Yeah, to be able to enjoy your own success.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Which is you should bear the fruits that you get out of such hard work. Yes. You have to have fun with them and enjoy it. So,
Vardaan, thank you so much. This is just amazing.
Sure thing, and I'm so glad you came out. And all the best to everybody who's watching.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, you can share my contact details, and happy to
absolutely
take any follow-up questions as well. So
awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone.